The ranger only asked us one question before we led us onto the trail, and it wasn't about weather or water or whether we'd told anyone where we were going. He asked if we'd heard anything unusual on our drive-in. I laughed. My friend Callum didn't. Neither of us knew, standing in that gravel lot with the fog still clinging to the tree line, that the question wasn't procedure. It was a warning dressed up as small talk. I want to tell you 3 things that happened to me over the 6 years I worked as a seasonal ranger in the Appalachians, spread across 3 different districts, 3 different mountains, 3 different kinds of wrong. I've never told all 3 back-to-back before. I've never had to. But lately, I've been dreaming about the fire tower again, and I think putting this down, saying it out loud, is the only way I'm going to stop. I'll start with the first one because it's the one that taught me to be afraid of silence. Part 1. The Fire Lookout. I was 23, fresh out of a forestry program, and I took the fire lookout post on Kessler Ridge because nobody else wanted 6 weeks of total isolation. The tower sat above 4,000 feet, a single room on stilts with windows on all sides, a wood stove, a cot, and a radio that only worked when the weather cooperated, which in that part of the range was maybe half the time. My job was simple: watch the horizon, log smoke, report anything that looked like the start of a burn. The previous lookout, a man named Halloran, had left the post 2 weeks early. The district office told me he'd had a family emergency. I believed that for exactly 19 days. The first 10 days were the kind of peaceful that makes you understand why people become hermits. I read 4 books. I learned to tell time by the shifting color of the ridgeline. I talked to the radio operator, a woman named Denise, twice a day. And those conversations became the highlight of my life in a way that embarrassed me a little. On the 11th night, I heard someone climbing the stairs. The tower had 68 steps, switchbacking up the tower legs, and I'd climbed them enough times to know the specific rhythm of my own boots on the wood. The 3rd step always groaned. The 11th always felt slightly loose underfoot. That night, at around 11, I heard footsteps coming up in that exact rhythm. Groan on 3, give on 11. Slow, deliberate, unhurried, like someone climbing at exactly my pace on exactly my stairs. I got up, heart already going, and looked down through the trapdoor hatch. Nothing. No one. The stairs sat empty in the moonlight, and the sound had simply stopped the moment I looked. I told myself it was thermal contraction, wood settling after the day's heat bled out of it. Fire towers do that. I'd read about it. I made tea I didn't drink and sat with my back to the wall until sunrise. It happened again the next night, and the night after that. Always the same rhythm, always stopping the instant I checked. By the 4th repetition, I stopped believing it was the wood. On day 15, I found something in my logbook that I hadn't written. Tucked between my own entries, smoke bearing 214, visibility 9 miles, was a single line in handwriting that wasn't mine, cramped and pressed hard enough to nearly tear the page. He keeps asking if I found the marker yet. I sat with that sentence for a long time. There was no he in my life up here. There was no marker I'd been told to look for. I radioed Denise and asked, as casually as I could manage, whether Halloran had mentioned anything strange before he left. There was a pause on the line longer than radio delay accounted for. "Why do you ask?" she said. Not a question, a test. I told her about the footsteps. I didn't tell her about the handwriting yet. I wanted to see what she'd say first. "Halloran didn't have a family emergency," she said finally. Her voice dropped low even though there was no one around her to overhear. "He walked off the mountain on foot in the middle of the night. No radio, no pack. Search and rescue found him 9 miles down at the ranger station, sitting on the front steps, refusing to say a word about what happened. He quit the next morning. Did he say anything before he quit? He said the tower wasn't finished asking him questions. That night I didn't sleep at all. I sat facing the trapdoor with the lantern turned low, and somewhere around 2 in the morning, the footsteps started again. 3rd step groaned. 11th gave. And this time, they didn't stop when I looked. They kept coming, all the way up, slow, and even right up to the hatch, and stopped there, on the other side of 2 inches of wood, close enough that I swore I could hear breathing. I did not open the hatch. I have never been more certain of a decision in my life. Instead, I asked, in a voice that came out steadier than I felt, "What marker?" The breathing stopped. Then, very quietly, From directly beneath the hatch, something that was almost a voice, roughened like it hadn't been used properly in a long time, said 4 words, "You're standing on it." I looked down. The trapdoor sat in the center of the floor, and beneath the floor I knew was nothing but 60 feet of open air and the tower's steel understructure. There was no marker beneath me. There couldn't be unless the marker wasn't beneath the floor. Unless it was the floor. I didn't sleep in that tower again. I spent the next 11 nights in a sleeping bag on the observation deck outside, in the open air, in full view of the sky, because whatever was using those stairs never once came up when I wasn't, inside the room with the hatch. On my last night, my replacement's truck already visible on the switchback road below, I finally worked up the nerve to pry up one of the floorboards near the center of the room, the one directly under the hatch. Underneath, wedged between 2 joists, was a small brass survey marker, the kind surveyors drive into bedrock to mark an official elevation point, except this one wasn't stamped with coordinates. It was stamped with a name. Not Halloran's, not mine. A name I didn't recognize, and a date 31 years before the tower was built. I put the floorboard back. I never told the district office what I found. I requested never to be assigned to Kessler Ridge again, and they never asked why. On my last night, my replacement's truck already visible on the switchback road below, I finally worked up the nerve to pry up one of the floorboards near the center of the room, the one directly under the hatch. Underneath, wedged between 2 joists, was a small brass survey marker, the kind surveyors drive into bedrock to mark an official elevation point, except this one wasn't stamped with coordinates. It was stamped with a name. Not Halloran's, not mine. A name I didn't recognize, and a date 31 years before the tower was built. I put the floorboard back. I never told the district office what I found. I requested never to be assigned to Kessler Ridge again, and they never asked why. I think about that marker sometimes, wedged into the bones of a building that shouldn't have been able to contain it, and I wonder how many lookouts before Halloran heard the same footsteps and said, "Nothing," because saying something meant admitting the mountain had noticed you back. Part 2. The One Who Wasn't Lost. The second story happened 4 years later, on a different range entirely, during my time on a search and rescue crew. I want to be upfront about something. Search and rescue calls are usually sad, not scary. Someone twists an ankle. Someone loses the trail at dusk. Occasionally, someone doesn't make it, and that stays with you in a heavy human way that has nothing to do with horror. This one was different from the first radio call. We got the report just after 9 p.m. A hiker overdue on a loop trail that should have taken 4 hours, reported missing by a friend who'd been waiting at the trailhead since sunset. Standard protocol. 4 of us went in with headlamps, thermal blankets, and a rough idea of where the trail forked in a way that confused first-timers. What made it strange from the start was the friend's story. She said her hiking partner, a woman named Petra, had gone ahead of her on the trail around 3 p.m. to scout the overlook and simply never came back to the junction where they'd agreed to meet. No scream, no sound of a fall. She'd just stopped being ahead of her. We searched for 2 hours before anyone found anything, and what we found wasn't Petra. It was her jacket, folded, not dropped. Not torn off in a struggle, folded, the way you'd fold a jacket to pack it, sitting in the center of the trail a half-mile past the junction, as if someone had set it down deliberately for us to find. My team lead, a 20-year veteran named Osei, went quiet in a way I'd never seen from him. He crouched by the jacket for a long moment before speaking. "Everyone stay on the trail," he said. "Nobody goes off it, not for anything you see." I asked him what that meant. He didn't answer directly. He just said that 7 years earlier, on this same loop, they'd found a different hiker's boots arranged the same way, laces tucked neatly inside, half a mile from where the hiker herself was. Eventually found 3 days later, 12 miles in the wrong direction, with no memory of walking there, and a story about a voice that sounded exactly like her father's, calling her name from just off the trail, over and over, always a little further away each time she followed it. We kept moving. 20 minutes later, I heard it myself, a voice calling a name. Not Petra's name, mine, my own name, called from somewhere in the trees to our left, in a voice that had no business knowing me at all, and yet sounded uncannily, impossibly like my mother's. I stopped walking. Osei grabbed my arm before I could turn my head fully toward the sound. "That's not her," he said, low and fast. Whatever answers back is never her. Keep your eyes on the trail markers. Count them out loud if you have to. I counted out loud, embarrassingly, like a child, all the way to the next switchback, while the voice kept calling my name from the dark, shifting position each time. Never quite where I expected it, always. Just close enough to make my skin crawl, and just far enough that I couldn't have reached it even if every part of my training hadn't been screaming at me not to try. We found Petra 40 minutes later, not lost, not injured, sitting cross-legged in the middle of the trail, facing away from us, perfectly calm, as though she'd been waiting for a bus. When we called her name, she didn't turn around right away. There was a pause, 1 or 2 seconds too long before she did. She told us she remembered reaching the overlook. She remembered starting back. She did not remember anything after that, not the 4 hours that had passed, not how she'd ended up sitting exactly where we found her, not why her shoes, when we checked them, were bone dry despite the fact that the last quarter-mile of trail crossed a creek she would have had to wade through to get there. She was fine physically, uninjured, hydrated even, which made no sense for someone who'd supposedly been wandering for 4 hours. She kept her eyes down for most of the walk back to the trailhead, and at one point, unprompted, she said something that none of us asked her to explain. And no one did. She said, "It kept telling me I already agreed to the trade. I don't remember agreeing to anything." Osei filed the report the way he always did. Hiker located, condition stable, contributing factors unknown. But in the truck on the way back, he told me something he said he'd never put in writing. In the 7 years he'd worked that range, there had been 4 incidents on that same loop involving hikers who went missing for hours and turned up unharmed with no memory of the gap. In every single case, the hiker had, at some point afterward, used the word trade. Nobody has ever figured out what the trade is supposed to be or what's collecting on it. Petra moved away within the year. I don't know if she ever hiked again. I know I've never gone back on that loop. Not once. Not even in daylight. Not even with a full crew. Part 3. Section 7. The last story is the one that made me leave the job entirely, and it's the one I've told the least, because it's the one where I stopped being able to convince myself there was a reasonable explanation waiting somewhere just out of reach. I was working a district that had a closed backcountry sector, officially designated Section 7, roughly 9 square miles of old-growth forest that had been off-limits to the public for 11 years by the time I got there. The official reason was unstable terrain, a series of sinkholes from old mining activity that made the ground unsafe. That was the story we gave hikers who asked. It was not the reason the rangers avoided it themselves. They were required to do a quarterly perimeter check of Section 7, walking the boundary trail to confirm the closure signs and fencing hadn't been disturbed. It was supposed to be a 2-hour walk. Every ranger I ever worked with found a way to make it shorter, or found a reason to bring a partner, or found a reason to schedule it for the earliest possible hour of daylight. Nobody talked about why. It was simply understood, the way certain things get understood in workplaces without anyone writing a memo about it. My first perimeter check, I went alone, because I didn't yet know better. Section 7 didn't look dangerous. That was the unsettling part. It looked like any other stretch of Appalachian hardwood forest, all mist and moss and the particular green-gold light that comes through a canopy in early autumn. What was wrong wasn't visible. It was the sound, or rather the absence of it. Forests are never silent. There's always something, birds, insects, wind moving through leaves, the small, constant static of a living system. Along that boundary trail, for stretches of 100 yards at a time, there was nothing. Not muffled, not distant, absent. The way a room goes silent when someone has just stopped talking mid-sentence, as if the forest itself had been having a conversation and paused because I'd walked in on it. Twice during that first walk, the silence would break all at once, birds exploding out of the canopy in every direction at the same instant, as though something on the other side of the fence had moved. I finished the walk faster than I want to admit and didn't think much more of it until the following spring, when the sector was scheduled for a full internal boundary reassessment, and I was assigned to accompany a surveyor named Prentice 30 yards inside the closure line. Inside, not along the perimeter, because the fence itself needed to be moved to account for erosion. Prentice had been doing this work for almost 2 decades and did not scare easily, which is why what happened to him has stayed with me longer than almost anything else on this list. We were maybe 200 yards past the fence line when he stopped walking and told me, very calmly, that we needed to leave. immediately, without discussing it. When I asked why, he pointed at a tree 8 or 9 yards off the trail. Carved into the bark, at roughly eye height, was a series of marks, not initials, not the kind of casual carving you find on old-growth trees near any trail in the country. These were tally marks, dozens of them, grouped in careful sets of 5, running in a vertical column that started above head height and continued down past the roots into the soil itself, as if whoever made them had kept counting long after there was any tree left to carve. Prentice didn't explain what he thought the marks meant. He simply turned and started walking, fast, back toward the fence line, and told me not to look behind us. I looked behind us. There was nothing there. I want to be honest about that. I didn't see a figure or a shape or eyes in the tree line. What I saw was worse in a way I still find difficult to articulate. The trail behind us, the exact one we'd just walked, was gone. Not overgrown, not obscured, simply absent, unbroken forest floor where our own footprints should have been, as if the ground itself had reset the instant we passed over it. We didn't retrace our steps. We walked a straight compass bearing back to the fence, ignoring the trail entirely. And we didn't speak again until we were both back in the truck with the doors locked, which is a strange thing to do against something that had shown no interest in doors. Prentice filed his half of the incident report using language so clinical it stripped almost all the fear out of it. Anomalous trail degradation, recommend revised access protocol, and 2 weeks later requested a permanent transfer out of the district. I never got a straight answer about the tally marks, though one of the older rangers, a woman close to retirement who'd worked the district since Section 7 was first closed, told me once after enough beers that she probably wouldn't have said it sober, that the closure hadn't been about sinkholes at all. It had been about a survey crew 11 years earlier that went in 6 people strong and came out 5, and the 6th was never found, not even a boot, not even a bone, and that afterward every crew that went in reported some version of the same 3 things. The silence, the marks on the trees always a little higher, a little longer, every time someone counted them, and the trail behind them disappearing as though Section 7 wasn't interested in where you were going, only in making sure you couldn't easily go back the way you came. I did one more perimeter check after that, months later with a partner, staying strictly on the outer boundary trail, and I counted the marks on a tree near the fence line out of some morbid compulsion I still don't fully understand. There were more than there'd been when Prentice showed me. I didn't count them a second time to check. I didn't want to know if they'd change again while I was standing there. I put in for a transfer of my own not long after. I told the district office it was for personal reasons, which was true, if incomplete. I don't have a tidy way to end this. I don't have an explanation that ties the fire tower and the trail and Section 7 together into something that makes sense in daylight. Maybe they're not connected at all. Maybe the mountains are simply old enough and empty enough that things accumulate in them the way sediment accumulates at the bottom of very deep water, and every so often something that's been settling there for a very long time gets disturbed by someone walking through. I still work outdoors. I still love these mountains in the complicated way you can love something that has shown you it doesn't entirely have your interests at heart, but I don't take the quiet trails anymore. Not without someone beside me, and if I ever hear footsteps behind me that match my own pace exactly, I don't turn around to check whose they are. Some questions are better left unasked. I learned that on a fire tower a long time ago, and it's the only piece of advice from that job I've never once regretted following.